Hey, Motorman here. If you just wandered onto this channel by accident, I'm a motor officer instructor. I've got over 900 instructional videos here on YouTube. And today, we're going to go for a ride and I'm going to talk to you about, is your motorcycle too big for you? Yes, it happens sometimes. People buy a motorcycle that's too big or too heavy, or they think it's too big or too heavy. So that's what we're going to talk about. So hop on the back, don't be wiggling around or anything. And if you're really good, I might let you play with the siren, but come on, let's go. Well, okay, as I promised, today we're going to talk about, is my motorcycle too big for me? Is it too heavy? You know, I get this a lot, and I see it a lot in my classes, especially from people who used to ride, we call them re-entry riders. Somebody used to ride 20 or 30 years ago, and now they haven't ridden it all that time, and then they buy the biggest, heaviest motorcycle they could find, either a full-dressed Harley or a big Indian or a Goldwing, whatever. It's almost as if I have to buy the biggest, heaviest bike I could find. It's got to weigh at least 900 pounds. Yeah, and then they have all kinds of problems with the motorcycle. They say it's big and clumsy and heavy. They keep dropping the motorcycle. So is my bike too big for me? Well, it could be. The fact is, guys and girls, if you came from a smaller motorcycle many years back that weighed 500 pounds, because, you know, back, say, in the 70s or the early 80s, a big, heavy motorcycle was something that weighed 550 pounds. Maybe the biggest Harley at that time was 650 or so. But now motorcycles weigh a lot more. They're bigger, longer, and heavier. And the fact is, on the 500-pound motorcycle that you thought you were doing pretty good on, well, actually, and I've seen this happen, you were able to muscle the bike around a bit. If it started to tip over, yeah, most of the time you were able to catch it because it weighed 500 pounds or less. You know, if you had a mid-sized bike back in the 80s, it was probably closer to 450 pounds. So if the bike started to tip over, or at low speeds, you could duck walk it around and it didn't feel like it was going to tip over. Well, that's fine, but really, if you didn't have any skills on the 400 or 500 pound motorcycle, getting a 8 or 9 or even 1,000 pound motorcycle is going to amplify the fact that you have a lack of skills. On a big motorcycle, or in fact any motorcycle, the weight of the bike is on the tires. Unless you're pushing the bike or backing it up, the weight should not mean a thing. The motorcycle doesn't care how heavy it is, and I've talked about this kind of thing before. If you have technique, you could ride even the biggest, heaviest motorcycle. Even the smallest, tiniest person can ride the heaviest motorcycle with the ease of a child's toy. A few years back, I had a young lady on our Ride Like a Pro team. She claimed to be 4'10". I once measured her in bare feet. She was actually 4'9" or 4'9.5". I was able to teach her to ride an electric glide. She went from a 250cc, a little training bike that I had, to the electric glide in about an hour and a half. She was 15 years old at the time, and in fact it was at one of our regular classes. And yeah, she had ridden dirt bikes before and was pretty good on a dirt bike. But I asked her, her father brought her to the class. I knew him for a long time. And I said, you think she'd be able to master a big bike like this? He said, sure. She's not the type to be afraid of anything. And sure enough, in a little over an hour, she went from that 250 to the electric glide and was actually riding it better than everybody else in the class. And there was about 7 or 8 guys in the class, all of whom had been riding for at least 10 years, and most of them 20 to 25 years. She was literally riding circles around them. I explained the techniques to her for low-speed handling, proper use of your head and eyes, the proper use of the friction zone, and putting a little pressure on the rear brake. Now, this girl was so tiny, she had to put the kickstand up and then leap onto the motorcycle quickly before it fell over, and then balance it on one foot, then hit the starter and go. once she was going, and when I say going, I mean 2 miles an hour, she'd do anything she wanted with that bike because she had a good handle on the clutch and throttle and the rear brake, and she knew that the bike would go wherever she looked. And also, you've seen my wife, I'm sure, if you've been on this channel before, whipping around this very bike that I'm riding, Electric Glide. She whips it around like a toy. She weighs 125 pounds. I think she's 5'2", maybe 5'3" in heels. So it doesn't take size or strength. It takes technique. I had a woman come to my class a little while back, and she was on, I think it was a Heritage. And I mean, it was pitiful. Her skill level it was as if it was her first day ever on a motorcycle. And she had like 30,000 miles on the bike and said she'd been riding for years. And she said, I had a Sportster before this, and I never had a problem with the Sportster. Now keep in mind, a Heritage is, for a heavyweight motorcycle, it comes in around 700 pounds. It is an easy motorcycle to handle. Not much lean angle, but it is, the handlebars turn pretty far from lock to lock. It's, to me, I mean, it's a piece of cake. And she said, on my Sportster, I never had a problem. I said, really? You're sure about that? She said, oh yeah, I could do anything I want with that. I said, you'd be able to run a course like this with on the Sportster? She said, oh, in my sleep. Now, I'm exaggerating, but just a little bit. Well, it happened that day I had my Sportster, an 883 Sportster Low, in the trailer. And I said, well, I'm going to take you off your bike and I'm going to let you try it on the Sportster. Well, now all of a sudden her eyes opened wide because she knew I was about to call her bluff. So she gets on the Sportster, and it was exactly the same thing. She had no conception of how to coordinate the clutch and throttle, use the friction zone, her head and eyes. She had zero skills. It was as if it was her first day. And when I mentioned that to her, I says, you know, you're not doing any better on this than you were the Heritage, so you really wish. She said, well, my Sportster was different. You know, there's always an excuse. I said, I don't think so. I think what you need is technique. Now, this is at the very beginning of the class, where the first thing we do is attempt a slow race, because if you can't do the slow race, that means you have no ability to use the friction zone. As we went along, I kept her on the Sportster. She managed to make it through the course, but you know, she was running over a lot of cones. She was running wide in the turns. Her U-turns were probably closer to 30 feet than the 24 feet that I have the course set up at. But the point is, if you have no or limited skills, don't get a bigger motorcycle until you master the smaller one. You would think that makes sense, and it's just common sense, but I see it all the time. And it's the same thing with guys. In fact, I've had guys who were on a big heavy motorcycle, a big Harley, and they've been on that bike for 5 or 6 years, ridden 20, 30,000 miles or more, and they can't make a simple U-turn. Now, I'm sure that the reason they're coming to me is because of that, because they realize and they're willing to admit that their skills are very lacking. And I got these heated grips on, and I got to lower them because they are working terrific. By the way, today it's in the mid-50s, and then with the wind chill factor on this motorcycle, it's probably in the 30s. Plus, it's a windy day. But the point is, you got to have some technique. If you don't have technique, I don't care what motorcycle you're riding, you're probably a crash looking for a place to happen. If all you could do is go straight, and I hear this all the time, I don't have any problem at high speeds. Well, at anything above 15 or 20 miles an hour, there's more force pulling you forward than there is gravity pulling you down. Anybody could ride a bike at 20 or 30 or even 100 miles an hour in a straight line. The problem arises when you have to avoid an obstacle. That obstacle could be something in the road, but most of the time it's another vehicle who violates your right of way. The most common motorcycle crash is the vehicle that turns left in front of the motorcyclist. And if you don't know how to lean, turn, and swerve when that occurs, the average person will look right at that vehicle that they don't want to hit. And if don't have ABS, they will slam on the rear brake, lock the rear tire, and slide on the ground right into the vehicle they didn't want to hit, because they looked at it. And the bike goes wherever you look. The hands will follow the eyes. It works every time. And there's so many people, and there was a guy who was commenting on one of my videos. I think it was about fear of leaning the bike, and he said, well, experience teaches you how to lean. Well, experience really doesn't teach you that. I mean, you got to lean a bit. Right now I'm going to lean the bike slightly because I'm going around a big turn here. Anybody can do that. You should be able to do that the very first day. You get your license, you pass the beginner's course, you should be able to make turns like you see right here. There's nothing to it. It's pretty instinctual. It's counter steering, but I'm barely pushing forward and the bike is turning. It's at low speeds where everybody has the problem. And people are amazed when they tell me, yeah, I got a problem at low speeds. It's not just you. It's about 90% of the people out there who have a problem at low speeds. And the fact is, most motorcycle crashes occur at or below 20 miles per hour. And if you think about, well, why is that? It's because, let's say you're cruising along at 50. Right here, I'm doing 40, 30. I'm slowing down. I'm watching both of these cars. I'm covering both brakes. But if one of those were to pull out, I would be applying both brakes, and if there was a collision, the collision would occur below 20 miles an hour. Now, of course, I wouldn't be colliding with them. I'd just come to a nice, easy stop because I saw where my escape path was. I was covering both brakes, and I was expecting the unexpected. So many people don't do that, and that works okay if you're in your car, I guess, if you don't mind running into things. But you got the airbags and you got the seat belts. There's all kinds of protection with the metal around you. But on the bike, you got no protection, so you better prepare for the absolute worst. And should the worst happen, you better know which brake to use, when to use it. You better know how to use your head and eyes, and you better be able to lean, turn, and swerve. Because if you can't stop, you're going to have to release those brakes and attempt to swerve. The very first time you practice that swerve, it shouldn't be the day the car pulls out in front of you. You practice it under controlled conditions over and over again. We have a particular exercise we call the offset cone weave. It's a series of quick swerves, left to right, right to left, where you feel the bike transitioning quickly from full lean to the left to full lean to the right. And it's got to happen instantly to avoid a situation like that where a car pulls out in front of you. When we do this in the class with the so-called experienced riders, usually the first couple of times through that exercise, they're going too wide. In other words, they're not going between the cones as they should. They'll have to go around the cones. They'll go too slow. And of course, the slower you go, the more difficult it is to control the motorcycle. So when that car pulls out in front of you, you just got one shot at it out on the street. That's why we practice under controlled conditions for the street. So if you're thinking about moving up to a bigger motorcycle, please don't do it until you master the motorcycle you already have. My best advice to you is get my Ride Like a Pro video. I mean, you can get it for 20 bucks mailed to your door. We show you step by step how to learn these 3 techniques. We show you exactly how to set up these exercises, and if you get some tennis balls and cut them in half, you could set up most of the exercises in about 20 or 30 minutes. Go to any line parking lot, you use the lines in the parking lot as a guide, so you really don't have to measure hardly anything at all. And tennis balls are easy to carry and very cheap. Cut them in half with one of those electric steak knives. I found works the best. And yeah, the blade, if you cut a lot, I've cut like 300 of them, and the blade gets kind of dull. My wife complains about it, but I just put a new blade on. It works fine. A while back, there was a rider came to my class, and this rider was known for having ridden around the entire country from this area in Florida, Central Florida, all the way down to Key Largo, and then went up to Maine, and across the country to Oregon, California, and then down to Texas, and then back to Florida. I don't remember how many miles, but you know, she would brag about that trip and put it on Facebook and all. And as she comes to the class, and she's on a, I think it was an electric glide or maybe a road glide, and her U-turns were about 40, 50 feet. She couldn't turn within 24 feet, which is your average side street. Right here in this lane in front of me, it's 12 feet wide, 2 lanes, 24 feet. That's your average side street. And you should be able to turn a lot tighter than that, but at least in 24 feet. If you can't, you need some help. Anyway, after watching this girl for a while, I said to her, tell the truth, the reason you went around the entire country after you left your house here in Central Florida is because you couldn't make a U-turn. So you figured going around the entire country and then back would make the biggest, widest U-turn possible. And she laughed. But eventually we got her down. I had to take her off that bike, and I think I put her on a 750 Honda that I had as a training bike at the time. And she was 100% better. So that person was definitely on too big a motorcycle. Whatever bike she had before then, she hadn't mastered, she hadn't learned to use the technique, she had no skills. And she got the bigger bike, and going straight, well, you can go straight for, you know, thousands and thousands of miles, but like I said, the problem arises when you have to quickly maneuver that motorcycle, and if you don't know how to do that, you are in deep trouble. So my best advice, as I say, get the Ride Like a Pro video, practice on your own, spend, you know, if you just spend 2 hours on 2 Sundays, you should be able to do every one of the exercises. And then come to my Ride Like a Pro class. We got 22 of them around the country. We even have one in Japan, so if you're watching this from Japan, we got an excellent instructor out there, Motor Cop. I trained him here to present this course exactly as I do. But it's a good idea to practice, get some technique, even if you're not great at the techniques. You know, if you can get your U-turns down to 30 feet, you'll probably do fine in the class. I just got to take a few more feet off of that. Now, if you like this video, I would hope that you hit that thumbs up, subscribe, because I do usually 2, sometimes 3 or 4 videos per week. So you'll really get your money's worth on these free videos. And don't forget to click that little bell, because every time I come out with a video, if you click that bell, you'll get notified. Till next time, this is Motorman signing out. For those of you up north, I know it's pretty cold. There's a cold spell across the entire country right now. It's in the 20s or below. That cold spell dipped down here in Miami. It's only going to reach a high of 65 today. So I don't know how you feel, but hey, make like you're on the back of this bike, or make like you're riding this motorcycle until it warms up a bit. And don't forget to check those tires for proper pressure when you get back on that motorcycle, as they are going to lose quite a bit of air sitting in the garage when it's cold outside. Till next time.